When FDR established a minimum wage in 1938, it came with a flaw. There was no process to regularly increase the minimum wage. Since the minimum wage establishment, there has been several amendments to increase the minimum wage that today sits at $7.25 an hour. The last time the minimum wage was increased was in 2009, and now a growing movement is seeking to raise it again to $15 an hour. It started in the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, but now part of this movement is President Joe Biden along with many other Democrats. And since the Democrats control both the House, the Senate, and the presidency, it seems possible, if not likely, that a $15 minimum wage will become a reality.
It should be a national minimum wage of $15 an hour. No one working 40 hours a week should live below the poverty line.
We have got to raise the minimum wage to a living wage.
House Democrats are here to deliver on the promise to give hard-working men and women a well-deserved raise.
Many countries with a minimum wage increased it regularly to keep up with inflation and cost of living. But the US doesn't do so. Instead, changes have to be made manually by Congress. This is a chart of the minimum wage throughout time. As you can see, it's trending upward and has reached the highest point yet. But there's something missing. If we adjust for inflation, we see that it's in no way reached its highest point. In 1968, the minimum wage reached its highest point at around $12 an hour. The minimum wage is often compared to the median wage. The median wage is where 50% of the population earn more and 50% earn less. If you compare the minimum wage to the median wage, all other OECD nations that have a minimum wage score higher than the US. So here is what Democrats want to do. They want to incrementally increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour over a 6-year period from when the first change happens. This is achieved using a bill known as the Raise the Wage Act, which passed the House in 2019. It would make sure that the minimum wage rose $1.10 every year until it reached $15 an hour. After that, the minimum wage will be indexed to the median wage. So if the median wage increases, the minimum wage will increase by the same percent. Here is the same graph if the incremental increases start in 2022. This is all just the federal minimum wage, but states can set their own minimum wages. Some states don't have higher minimum wages and some do. The District of Columbia already has a $15 minimum wage. California will be the first state to implement a $15 minimum wage on January 1st, 2022. This comes after incremental increases since 2016. Other than California, 7 other states are incrementally increasing their minimum wage to $15 an hour. Currently, the minimum wage is a poverty wage. A person working 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, will make about $15,000 a year. That's just enough to put you above the poverty line for a single person. But let's say it's a single mother with 2 children working for that salary. She won't have enough. In fact, she would need to earn almost $22,000 a year in order to be above the poverty line. She would need to work 58 hours a week, 52 weeks a year to place her family just above the poverty line at a minimum wage. If the minimum wage was $15, she would be able to work 40 hours a week and place her family above the poverty line. But the poverty line is just one thing. Housing is even worse. According to the National Low Income Housing Coalition, A person working with the current minimum wage will need to work an average of 2.4 minimum wage jobs, or almost 100 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, to be able to have an affordable 2-bedroom apartment. According to Amy K. Glassmeyer, a MIT professor, the living wage in the US is around $16.50 an hour, when taking food, childcare, health insurance, housing, transportation, and other basic necessities into account. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, who do economic analyses for Congress, did a study of the Raise the Wage Act in 2019. They found that some 25.6 million workers over 10 years would see their pay increase as a result of a $15 minimum wage. The more progressive Economic Policy Institute put that number closer to 40 million workers who would benefit from a $15 minimum wage. Those who already have the lowest income would benefit the most. People who are currently living under the poverty line will see their family income increase by 5% on average under a $15 minimum wage. According to the Economic Policy Institute, minorities will disproportionately benefit from this change in minimum wage. The Congressional Budget Office also found that a $15 minimum wage would lift some 1.1 million people out of poverty. This would remove some of the societal problems that come with poverty, like crime and health problems. The Libertarian American Enterprise Institute say that the Congressional Budget Office severely overstate the poverty-reducing effects of a $15 minimum wage. Low wages are also bad for social mobility. Workers can't skip a day off work to have a job interview at a better paying place, because they need the money from the job they currently have every single day, and can't risk losing that job. A savings account is also crucial for upwards mobility. If your job barely pays enough to put food on the table, savings are unlikely. So low wages might be hampering the American dream of upward mobility from hard work. The big argument against a $15 minimum wage is that it would cause unemployment. The Congressional Budget Office found that 1.2 million workers would lose their job due to a $15 minimum wage. They found that the effect on unemployment ranges from no impact on employment to a loss of 3.3 million jobs. Economists have long disagreed on whether minimum wages create unemployment. The basic theory behind it is that higher minimum wages disrupt the natural market process of supply and demand, and that higher costs of labor will have to be made up for by lower employment. Labor is a cost of business that affects the bottom line. So if the cost of labor increases, businesses might have to start laying off employees if the business doesn't turn a profit anymore. The higher the minimum wage increase, the higher the cost of labor, and therefore the higher the number of people who will lose their job. There is not a consensus among economists as to how big these effects are. It also comes down to industry. A manufacturing job might hypothetically pay $10 an hour. If the minimum wage increases to $15 an hour, that would mean a 50% increase in pay. At that point, it might just be cheaper for the employer to lay off that worker and buy a machine that can do the same job. A restaurant waiter can't be replaced by a robot, at least yet, so they might not get laid off at the same rate as, for example, manufacturing workers. Another worry is that the cost of a higher minimum wage will be passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices for goods and services, which creates inflation. How much inflation and whether it hurts the economy is not something economists agree on. Now, it should be mentioned that most of these studies on a $15 minimum wage were done before COVID-19 and the subsequent economic downturn. Since then, almost 10 million workers have lost their job. 100,000 small businesses have closed. 50 million Americans risk going hungry. More than 1 in 3 households report having a hard time paying off the usual expenses. And nearly 8 million Americans have fallen into poverty since May. Estimates for the costs and effects of a $15 minimum wage might have changed since then. A $15 minimum wage comes with upsides and downsides. Consumers will have more money to spend, and it would make sure that no worker gets a poverty wage. On the other hand, employees may need to get laid off. It might also increase the speed of the ongoing automation of low-skilled jobs, and low-skilled workers will have a hard time finding jobs that they qualify for. Of course, this will not happen from a day-to-day basis. Businesses will have 6 years to adjust from the first increase, and after that the minimum wage will rise with the median wage. So what do you think? Should Joe Biden and the Democrats make good on the promise and pass a $15 minimum wage? Or do you think that the negatives will outweigh the benefits? Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you another time.